My sister tampered with my child's DNA test to steal our father's inheritance. I never imagined that my sister could betray me to such an extreme, nor did I expect our family to be torn apart by a scheme so cunning and cruel that it would target my child. Yet here I am, recounting the long and tumultuous story of how my sister altered the DNA results of my son, just so she could claim our father's inheritance for herself. I will do my best to write this entire account, even though it spans many years and many chapters of heartbreak. I am telling it in hopes that no one else ever endures what I went through, that no one has to see a beloved sibling morph into an enemy over money and land, that no one has to discover how fragile trust can be when greed takes hold. I grew up in a large old house along with my parents, my brother, and my younger sister. My mother died when I was just a teenager, so I have only faint memories of her, but I recall that she always stressed the importance of standing by one another. Father was a busy man, an investor and real estate developer who spent his time traveling, negotiating deals, and managing properties. He instilled in us a strong sense of responsibility, urging us to follow moral principles. At least that is what I believed in my youth. Perhaps I was naive. We were a family of 3 children. I am the middle child, with one older brother named Andrew and a younger sister named Stephanie. Our father used to say that one day we would inherit his estate fairly and that he had enough land and assets for all of us to be comfortable. He had no reason to suspect that any of his children would fight over money, because for so many years we seemed to get along well. Little did he know that money can twist hearts, or that those you trust can do the unthinkable when they feel threatened or tempted by a larger share of property. I studied teaching in college while my older brother Andrew went into engineering. Stephanie, being the youngest, studied liberal arts and traveled a lot, never holding on to one passion for very long. She was adventurous, always chasing excitement, while I was more of a homebody, especially after I married a man named Marcus, who shared my quiet ways. We lived in a small house near my father's estate, occasionally helping him with administrative tasks since he was getting older. My father had a considerable fortune, including farmland, rental properties, and shares in multiple local businesses. He always implied that eventually, all of it would be divided among me, Andrew, and Stephanie. My older brother, Andrew, had his own stable life, raising 2 children, working as a civil engineer. My sister, on the other hand, still roamed around at times, returning to see father, telling him about her adventures abroad, then leaving again. I recall that father once joked that Stephanie was too restless to handle farmland or a stable business, that she might simply want her share in cash so she could do more traveling. She always smiled sweetly, telling him that she was not so irresponsible. That was years before the real conflict started. I remember the day I discovered I was pregnant. My husband Marcus and I had been trying for a child for over a year, and when the test came out positive, we were overjoyed. Father was thrilled at the prospect of another grandchild. Andrew already had kids, but father was happy that now I would also experience motherhood. Stephanie, ironically, congratulated me with an expression that looked forced, as though she was not entirely happy for me. I thought maybe she was just envious that I was settling down with a family life she had yet to find. Had I known how far that envy or greed would lead her, I might have distanced myself early on. Time passed and I gave birth to a baby boy. My father was elated, calling him our family's new shining star. He had seen Andrew's kids, but they lived in another city, so father rarely spent time with them. My child was right here, near the old family estate, so father doted on him daily. He gave me a bit of land adjacent to the main property, urging me and Marcus to expand our small house so that we could remain close, which made sense, as father was aging and might need help eventually. All seemed well, until the rumor started spreading that father might be rewriting his will again, trying to clearly designate who got what portion of his estate so that there would be no confusion. My sister, Stephanie, returned from one of her lengthy travels. She met my newborn son with polite interest, commented on how sweet he was, but I saw something in her eyes that felt unsettling. She started hanging around father more often whispering about how best to manage some business or rearrange some farmland. I assumed she was merely being responsible at last. I wanted to believe that perhaps she had matured and wanted to help father in his final years. She even offered to babysit my son on occasion, though it was not often, because she found small towns boring and sometimes drifted away to do who knows what. My father treated her well, always giving her money or paying for her flights, telling me that we, as siblings, should never question how father distributes small gifts. It was around this time that father confided in me that he was definitely planning to divide his inheritance in a fair manner, giving each child a share. I felt relief because so many families get into legal fights over wills. He said that Andrew, being older, might get a portion of farmland, while I might inherit the old family house so I would not have to move, and Stephanie might get the orchard plus some rental properties. I remember nodding, saying that was fair. He told me not to worry, that by the time he died, it would be spelled out in a final will that no one could dispute. I never anticipated that my sister would do something so vile as tampering with the identity of my child to claim the entire inheritance. But that was exactly her plan. My sister's entire scheme hinged on creating doubt that my son was truly a descendant of my father. Because father was so proud to have me living next to him with my child, and that child was clearly going to share in the inheritance if father passed away, my sister must have felt threatened. She apparently had a suspicion that father would consider leaving me or my son an even bigger share, since we were the ones physically near him, helping out and forging that generational link. We had no idea how cunning she could be, or that she would decide the best approach was to fake a scandal that the child was not actually fathered by Marcus, or that I was unfaithful, or something equally devious that would disqualify my boy from being recognized as a blood descendant. I started noticing suspicious behavior from Stephanie when my boy was about 3 years old. She kept taking small locks of his hair, saying it was just for keepsakes or braiding practice, which struck me as odd, since he was a boy with short hair. She also would talk to my husband with sly comments, half joking about whether we were sure I was faithful, which upset me. I asked her to stop, and she would laugh it off, calling me too serious. She told father that she was worried about me, that I seemed paranoid. Father told me I was overreacting, that my sister was a free spirit who liked to tease. I wish I'd known then that these small steps were part of her plan to gather DNA or at least create confusion about the child's paternity. Father told me that Stephanie was insisting on a DNA test for everyone in the family, apparently as a fun genealogical exercise. He said that she'd proposed it as an interesting family project, to trace our genetic ancestry. I found it a bit weird, but father, being an old man who enjoyed new ideas, consented. He said we could do a simple test that would show our heritage. Andrew was not around to protest, and I figured there was no harm in a simple genealogical test. So father asked if I'd be okay with letting Stephanie collect DNA samples from me, from my child, from father, and presumably from Andrew if she could coordinate with him. I said, well, sure, though I found it odd that she took such an interest. My husband was indifferent, not seeing any red flags. We submitted cheek swabs, hair samples, or whatever Stephanie said was needed for this genealogical test. She claimed she had a contact at a lab. I did not think for a moment that she had any malicious intentions. That was my tragic mistake. Over the next few weeks, we barely heard anything about those results. My sister occasionally teased me, saying she was excited to see if we all matched up with father or had unexpected heritage. I shrugged it off. Meanwhile, father seemed excited to see if we had some unusual ancestry. Then one morning, father called me, sounding furious. He demanded I come to the house at once. My heart pounded because father rarely used such a tone. I hurried over, my son in tow, uncertain what crisis awaited. Father was in his study, holding a piece of paper in trembling hands. My sister stood nearby, wearing a look of feigned concern. Father asked me if I had anything to tell him, if I'd deceived him about who the father of my son was. I was shocked, stammering that I had no idea what he was talking about. Father showed me some lab result that supposedly proved that my son did not share paternal markers with father, meaning he was not actually fathered by Marcus, or that he was not father's grandson. The phrasing was confusing, but the conclusion was that the child was not genetically related to father. I felt my blood run cold. That was impossible. My son was definitely fathered by Marcus, and I am my father's biological daughter, so how could my child not share father's DNA? I told father that test must be a mistake. He demanded that I come clean, thinking I'd had an affair or something. My sister stood by, softly chiming in that maybe I had never confessed a secret fling, or that maybe I'd used a donor or lied. I was seething with rage. I insisted that was nonsense, that I'd never been unfaithful. Father kept waving the results, which my sister claimed came directly from the lab. She said the genealogical test showed that my son's markers did not match Father's line. It was insane, but Father believed it. He said he was hurt and betrayed. I pleaded for Father to do another test, a legitimate one we would arrange ourselves without going through my sister's contact. But Father refused, saying it was already proven that I'd apparently lied to the entire family. He said if my child was not truly of his blood, then Father had no obligation to include him in the inheritance. My sister, slyly, suggested that we all needed to be absolutely sure, but Father was too enraged to listen. He told me to take my child and get out of his sight for a while. I was devastated. I ran home in tears, telling Marcus what had happened. My husband was equally stunned, sure that the test must be fake or tampered with. He wanted to confront Father, but Father refused to see him. Meanwhile, my sister was comforting Father, no doubt pouring more poison into his ear. Over the next few days, Father refused all contact with me. He told me in an angry phone call that he would rewrite the will, excluding my son from any inheritance. He had not completely disowned me, but the emphasis was that my child was not his true grandson, so Father would not leave him anything. I was sick with worry. I kept trying to reason with Father that the test results had to be wrong, that we needed a second, more official test done at a recognized facility. But Father was convinced I was lying. I started noticing that my sister was acting triumphant, dropping hints about how Father might consolidate everything so that only Andrew and she would be recognized. She told me that Father was fully rewriting the documents, removing my son's name and skipping me if I was discovered to have lied. I was outraged, telling her that there was no reason to believe the test was real. She said that I was the one ignoring reality. Something about her expression made me suspect she had manipulated the results. My husband asked me if I thought she had done it. I realized it was the only explanation. My sister, who had arranged the entire genealogical test, must have swapped or tampered with the samples or the results, forging a scenario in which my boy was not recognized as Father's descendant. I tried to confront her, telling her I suspected she had faked the test. She played innocent, acting offended, calling me paranoid once more. She said maybe I was the one who had something to hide. She threatened that if I kept insulting her with baseless accusations, Father might cut me off entirely. Furious, I told her I would find proof of her forgery. She shrugged, as though unconcerned, saying no lab would confirm my story. Marcus and I decided we would do an official DNA test on our own, paying a reputable lab to confirm that my child was biologically mine and Marcus's, and also that Father was indeed the grandfather. I tried telling Father about it, but Father said he would not participate, that he was done with my attempts to spin the story. So we decided we would at least prove the fatherhood with me and Marcus. That test came back confirming that Marcus was absolutely the father, which meant the earlier genealogical result was nonsense. But Father refused to look at it, saying that my sister had already shown him the official results from her lab. He believed I had faked my new test. Desperate, I turned to Andrew. He was older and sometimes Father listened to him. I told Andrew all about the suspicious steps, how Stephanie insisted on collecting the samples, how Father was now excluding my son from the will, and that I believed the results had been forged. Andrew was shocked, but also did not want to get in the middle of a fight. He offered to talk to Father, but Father was so angry he would not budge. Stephanie apparently told Father that I was trying to fix a second test because I got caught lying. Andrew eventually sided with Father or remained neutral, unwilling to anger him. So I found no ally in my brother. Meanwhile, Father was rewriting all the documents. I was told that my son was no longer recognized as a legitimate heir. I was not fully cut out, but Father threatened that if I kept persisting, he might reduce my portion as well. My sister, on the other hand, was presumably set to gain a bigger chunk of Father's estate. She must have told Father that I'd manipulated my child to secure a bigger inheritance. So Father concluded that since I'd apparently used some other father or lied about the child's parentage, I'd proven my greed. It was twisted logic, and I could not do anything. My father would not let me speak. He told me he never wanted to see that boy again. Marcus and I looked for legal recourse. We wanted to show father that my sister had submitted a fake test. But father was a private man, and the property was his. He had full rights to distribute it as he pleased, especially after I'd apparently lost credibility in his eyes. No court could force him to name my son as an heir. The only possibility was to prove the first test was fraudulent. But my sister claimed she had destroyed the original samples, and father had only the final lab paper with an official stamp. She told me if I tried to publicly accuse her, I'd regret it. She threatened to reveal all sorts of lies about me. During that time, my father refused to see my child at all, refusing to accept him as a grandson. The heartbreak for my son was palpable, but he was too young to grasp the complexity. I tried to protect him from the drama, telling him that Grandpa was just busy or traveling. Meanwhile, I was raging inside. My sister's cruelty knew no bounds. She visited father often, presumably ensuring that he stayed convinced. She even started telling him that I'd always been jealous of her freedom, that I'd never liked being part of the family business. So maybe I'd done something desperate to secure a bigger share. A few months later, father officially updated the will, removing my son from any mention. He told me I should be happy he did not remove me as well, but he was not leaving me much. The bulk of the estate was split between Andrew and Stephanie, while I got a smaller parcel. Father said if I wanted to be ungrateful, I could go my own way. I tried one last time to beg father to do a real test. He refused. My sister was always present, whispering that I'd want to manipulate him further. Father walked away from me, leaving me in tears in the foyer of that old house. That was the day I realized how thoroughly I'd lost him. Marcus, seeing how devastated I was, wanted to move away from the entire area. But we decided to fight a bit more. We reached out to a well-known genetics lab in the city, which performed a thorough triple-verified test on me, my son, and my husband. It confirmed beyond a doubt that my son was ours. We tried to show father, but he would not even glance at the results. My sister told him I'd paid off the lab to produce a forgery, twisting everything. She was so skilled at lying that father believed her. Everyone else in the extended family was confused or neutral, not wanting to take sides. Some suspected I truly had an affair, while others suspected my sister was meddling, but no one was brave enough to confront her. Time slipped by. My father grew older, my sister grew more established in his good graces, and my son grew up without the presence of a grandfather who was just minutes away but wanted nothing to do with him. The sadness weighed on me daily. Eventually, father fell ill and I tried to see him, but Stephanie blocked me, saying father did not want me near. She told me father had not forgiven me for that so-called betrayal. She threatened to call security if I tried to force my way in. I was appalled, but I did not have the heart to create a scene. Marcus tried talking to father, but father would not even open the door. I asked Andrew for help, but Andrew was mostly out of town, immersed in his own affairs, telling me to let it be. He claimed father was stubborn, that maybe I'd have better luck after father recovered. But father never fully recovered. He remained ill, confined to the house. Father passed away quietly. I learned of it from Andrew, who texted me. My sister never even contacted me. I rushed to the family house, only to be told by some men at the door that father had left instructions not to let me inside. I was in shock. My father had disowned me so much that I was not even allowed to see his body. My sister arranged the funeral details, telling me I could attend the ceremony if I did not bring my child. I was furious. My father was my father, and my son had every right to say goodbye. But my sister said that father had specified that child was not recognized, so he should not appear. I did go to the funeral alone, standing at the back, tears streaming. My sister looked triumphant, receiving condolences with a solemn expression, but I saw in her eyes that she had succeeded in rewriting the entire story. Andrew was there, polite but distant. My child stayed home with Marcus, too confused to understand why Grandpa had wanted nothing to do with him. That day burned an imprint of bitterness into my heart. After father was buried, his will was read. Andrew and Stephanie each received large portions of land and assets. My sister got the largest share, including the main house and farmland, while Andrew got a smaller portion of commercial property. I was left with a token piece, hardly significant compared to what father once promised. My son was not mentioned at all. The final lines of the will said father recognized only Andrew's children as legitimate grandkids, noting that my child had no rightful claim. The relatives in attendance whispered among themselves, some casting sympathetic glances, others quietly criticizing me. I had no words. I was too numb with pain. Marcus and I decided to see if there was any legal avenue to challenge the will. Our lawyers said it might be possible if we could prove father was deceived by fraudulent DNA results. But to do that, we would need the original test documents or the cooperation of the lab. That lab was some obscure place my sister claimed to know. We found no record of it. We found no official employees. It was presumably a facade or a shell operation. My sister refused to disclose anything. The lawyers said we might attempt to show father was manipulated in his final years, but we had limited evidence. The process could take years with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, Stephanie held the property. I tried one last approach, making a public statement hoping that Andrew might come forward. But Andrew was uninterested in scandal, content with his portion. My sister threatened to countersue me for defamation if I tried to publicly accuse her. She said I'd never win, that no court would forcibly rewrite the will to recognize my child. Exhausted, I realized I'd hit a dead end. In the aftermath, I felt hollow. My father died believing I was unfaithful, that my son was not truly his grandson, all because my sister tampered with a DNA test to secure a bigger slice of the inheritance. She got away with it. She owns the house, the orchard, the farmland. I inherited a fraction of what I'd expected, and my boy lost any chance to know his grandfather. The heartbreak is immeasurable. My husband has always stood by me, but I see the anger in his eyes. He cannot believe father refused to see the second test, or that Stephanie so brazenly manipulated everything. It's been a couple of years since father passed. My sister now lives in the old family house. She occasionally invites Andrew's family to visit. She has posted pictures of how she is renovating the place, turning part of it into a retreat or a bed and breakfast. Part of me hates seeing those images, knowing the house should have been shared among all of us, that father once talked about dividing it fairly, that maybe one day my son would inherit a share. Now my son will never step foot in that house as a rightful heir, or if he tries, he'll find only the sister who orchestrated this nightmare. People sometimes ask me how I'm certain my sister forged the test, if I have no direct proof. My answer is that the chain of events is too coincidental. She was the one collecting the samples. She had the connections to that shady lab. She was the one who built suspicion about my son's paternity. She was the one who ended up with the greatest share, once father cut out my child from the inheritance. Could it be any clearer? She denies it all, of course, acting offended at the notion. She claims father simply discovered the truth of my alleged infidelity, that my second test was the fake one. But in my heart, I know the truth. Sometimes I wish I'd never done that genealogical test at all. Maybe none of this would have happened. But I realize, if not that, my sister might have found another scheme. She saw a chance to enlarge her portion of the inheritance and took it. My father, for all his wisdom in business, was blind to the fact that his beloved youngest child could be so manipulative. He was too proud to believe that I might be right about her. In the end, it was father who lost as well, dying with a fractured family, never knowing his actual grandson. I share my story in hopes no one else experiences such betrayal. It's unimaginable that a sibling would go so far as to sabotage the identity of a child, but greed is a powerful force. My sister succeeded in rewriting the will, forging lab results that father trusted without question. I can only raise my son with the knowledge that he was the victim of a cruel lie, but that he's mine and my husband's in every sense. We hold no illusions about receiving father's estate now. We do what we can to move on and build a stable life on our own. If there's any justice, it might be that my sister will never truly have peace of mind, living in the shell of a stolen inheritance, surrounded by ghosts of a family she betrayed. Time passes, and I've learned to accept that some people will do anything for money, including tampering with DNA tests and poisoning a father's mind. I have forgiven father in my heart for believing her lies, because he was old and set in his ways. But as for my sister, I doubt I'll ever forgive her for the heartbreak she caused. She not only took away property that might have belonged to my son, she robbed him of a loving grandfather who spent his final years resenting us. My child sometimes asks about Grandpa, and I do not have a satisfactory answer. I say Grandpa got confused in his old age, that he was told something untrue, but my son is still too young to fully understand. Maybe one day I'll explain in detail. So that is my story, spelled out from beginning to end, of how my sister tampered with the DNA test of my child to steal our father's inheritance. Through cunning and deception, she convinced him my son was not truly his grandchild. Father cut me and my boy out of most of the will, leaving my sister the lion's share. He died never learning the truth. My hope is that by sharing this, I show how greed can corrupt even the closest siblings, that one must be vigilant and never imagine that a person who smiles and acts caring cannot also orchestrate a vicious lie. May my experience serve as a warning to be cautious with family and to trust, but verify. My life will never be the same, but I hold on to my husband, my son, and the knowledge that at least we have each other, even if the old family home and fortune fell into my sister's undeserving hands.